Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be talking to you today. Today, I wanted to deep dive on one subject that has been something that has come up in other things that we have talked about, but we've never really done a deep dive on it. And I've noticed some common misconceptions people have around this, which is
Ooh.
I think that everybody broadly knows that in the 90s, big business was predominantly right wing. If you were, we always use like the Jack Donaghy stereotype here. If you were a big business guy, you were a right wing guy. If you were a big corporate guy at like some, whether it's BlackRock or whether it's, McKinsey, the stereotype is that you would be right wing. Today, the stereotype is that you'd be extremely left wing. The core Republican Party used to be made up of an alliance of a theocratic faction in the United States and a big business faction, and it broke apart, making way for the new right alliance, with big business departing the alliance in the early 2000s.
Hmm.
Now, the question is why? And the answer that I have always given historically is that this happened because the memetic virus that we call the urban monoculture, some people may call it wokeism, whatever you want to call it, spreads better and faster within bureaucracies. And
Yeah.
I think that this is a part of it, but I don't think it's everything.
Okay.
Secondly, I think a core mistake that a lot of people make when they're looking at this is to assume, and I've heard this from so many people, that well, it's natural that big business was a Republican aligned party in the 90s because it wanted lower tax rates, it wanted less regulations, it wanted all of that stuff. And this is a very naive understanding of what businesses actually care about, especially large businesses. It is actually just as perplexing that big businesses align themselves with the right in the 90s as big business aligning themselves with wokeness today. Because generally, big businesses prefer a large amount of regulations and taxes and other barriers to entry. There is
Right.
a reason why Sam Altman is going around trying to get everybody terrified of AI so that you can get additional AI regulations, because he knows no matter how big the regulations are, they'll never be enough to shut down OpenAI, but they may prevent his competitors. Do you want to talk on this before I go further?
No, keep going. This resonates though.
And so I was thinking about this and I was talking to someone about this and I was saying, well, here's a really interesting thing. When I look at what the Democratic Party represents today, an alliance of, and I always use the word urban monoculture, but if I change the definition, an interesting pattern emerges. It is an alliance of big business interests and the dominant cultural group in the United States whose
Uh,
primary interest is imposing its value system on other people. And then when I say that and I go back to the 90s, that was the alliance that existed as well. It
yeah.
was big business was the dominant cultural group. So when we talk about the theocratic coalition that existed in the 90s, this was a group of individuals who are basically like, okay, where does Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, the main American religious systems, Mormonism, where do their sort of moral shadows overlap? We're going to call this the Judeo-Christian tradition. And then we are going to try to impose this on citizens through laws, through the school system, through other things like that. And that is they were never as good at it as the urban monoculture was, but they definitely had the same gist of an idea. And I think one, before we go into it, this also helps highlight where we are so antagonistic to some people on the right. Where I think lay people, when they see us being antagonistic to these groups, they say that we are being antagonistic to groups that are just further right leaning than ourselves. And I think that these are the same types of people who think that what happened is the right today is just the 90s Democrats, and that the both parties have been moving to the left, when instead what I'd argue is no, what actually happened is the left today is the 90s theocrats. It's just we have a different dominant cultural group in this country, and the right today is a fundamentally new party that doesn't really represent the axis of the political axis that existed at all in the 90s. Um,
Exactly.
And so when these people are doing their thing and they're like, "Oh, we wanna impose, like, gay marriage bans or something like that," I'm like, "Well, you're just acting like the left from my perspective. You're trying to impose a cultural value system," which
Yeah.
is why I think there's so much hostility to this sort of rhetoric
Mm.
within the modern right. But before we go further with this, I want to ask the question, why does big business constantly find itself on the same side as the dominant cultural group attempting to enforce its value system using the justice system and using laws within its country?
Well, because they have the money, right? And business goes where the money is, like sharks following blood.
Do they have the money though? I don't know if they ever really had the money. The
I don't
theocratic
know how
type,
you can't impose a policy upon other people without having deep pockets. Politicians don't listen to you if you don't have deep pockets.
I'm going to
And
disagree.
well, no, I mean, also think that, I think the major huge political donors did go woke.
I
So,
agree with that, but I don't think that that is why the politicians are following them. I think that when I look at the sort of imposition of woke culture on other people, I think it was from a vocal minority, and that the wealthy then ended up following it because they saw this vocal minority and saw them as a threat. And I think
mm,
it's very similar to like the satanic panic of the 80s or the extremist evangelicals of the 90s, where they never really made up that large of a population. But if you had something like, a demon in a show or something like that, you had to be very careful about it, or anything that could be seen. We actually saw this with the Catholics. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but for a long time, Hollywood wouldn't make any movie that could be interpreted as anti-Catholic because the Catholics were
really?
very, very good at vetoing movies. The organization I'm talking about here is the National Legion of Decency, but my timeline is a bit off. They were mostly prominent between the 1930s and 1960s. And they used the audience of 20 million Catholics who, back during that time period, would actually listen to what the church told them to do, which they don't so much anymore, which is largely why the council lost power, to boycott movies. And they ended up influencing things like the Hays Code and most of the movies that were released. And there was actually this chain of like movies made by Hollywood specifically to endear studios to the church. Like in one of them, the plot was something like a Catholic preacher was given a confession, but like that the guy was going to murder someone or like murder him, the preacher, and like he couldn't do anything about it because he was so moral and he had to follow, these rules. And this was a common thing. And you might actually have noticed this, that Catholic preachers were disproportionately in media in the 80s and mid 90s. And
Huh.
you basically don't see them in media anymore because they weren't that big a faction of Americans.
So that their appearances were artificial. You are arguing.
Their appearances were artificial due to, and I'll look up in post some specific examples of this, but it was a specific union of Catholics that would boycott movies.
Hmm. That's so interesting. I mean, that I suppose makes sense.
Which
So
was, I
it's
think,
more about who is strategically in power? Is that what you are saying is going on?
no, I think the right, despite what people would say today, in the 90s and 80s had a form of cancellation. They would say that this individual is satanic or this individual is, they'd use different words to label them, but they had a form of saying, oh, this company does this or this, therefore we won't do business with them. And I think especially children's media was very afraid of crossing these boundaries for a very long time. And I think that the wokes more borrowed these existing tools, but implemented them much more effectively.
Mm.
And I think what we might be seeing here is big business is very susceptible to bullying more so than it is looking for market demand.
Oh,
And
so wait, you okay? So could this be an issue of larger bureaucracies having basically the sensitivity to criticism, and that's why they're more subject to whatever the mainstream zeitgeist is, because they have compliance departments, they have lawyers, they have marketing departments that are capable of hearing criticism and freaking out about it, whereas smaller organizations just don't have an ear or an eye to that kind of thing.
I wonder if it might even be that the type of person who works at a large company is more sensitive to criticism. So when
Oh,
I think about our friend groups, our job basically with the pronatalist movement is attracting criticism in a way that furthers the message of the movement.
right.
Um, So we're always going around baiting media sources to try to get them to talk about us, and then we use that to draw attention to our cause areas in ways that are usually pretty effective. Like, honestly, we've been enormously effective. I don't think that there's been a public media figure that has been as effective as us at either rising or catching attention in the last 5 years, which I take great pride in. But
Feels
this has given us a unique understanding of who has freaked out about knowing us or being publicly associated with us. And the people
um,
at startups or venture capital firms or small companies,
yeah, they give
they
0
generally
shits.
don't
They're like,
care.
"Okay, fine."
The bureaucrats who work or run very large companies are extremely scared of being associated with us. They are
Yeah.
extremely scared of criticism. And I wonder if a fear of failing, and which is I think where this fear of criticism comes from, failing in other people's eyes or being
Mm,
seen as not good enough,
mhm.
associates with working in large companies.
Yeah, well, I could see basically not being willing to stand for anything personally and being really afraid of being subject to criticism would make a job at another company where you can always blame it on someone higher up the line, blame the company, blame your manager,
Yeah.
etc. Yeah, yeah, I could see that. And you could argue that also people with a bigger external locus of control are more likely to be drawn to larger organizations and
Actually, I'm
bureaucracies.
having an understanding here. Both of these types of people aren't just drawn to large companies, they're also drawn to academia. They're both career tracks where it's for people who are more afraid of failing. They don't wanna go outside their bubble. They're just like,
Mm,
"Okay, this is what I've been doing for the past 4 years. I'm just gonna keep doing it if I can maybe make some money from doing it." And they're very sensitive. They have a lot of status anxiety. They're
yeah.
very sensitive to the status the job gives them. And so not just a fear of media criticism, but potentially a fear of criticism within these organizations makes the memetic virus spread faster within the organization.
That that's quite interesting. Yeah. Well, but then aren't you really ultimately just arguing the same thing that you've been arguing since the beginning, which is that memetic viruses are more likely to spread in these large bureaucracies, and
Well,
maybe the
no, not
refinement you've
exactly.
gotten.
I don't think that the '90s version of, like, evangelical mom was really a memetic virus. I think that they like, evangelicalism didn't spread through companies in the same way wokeism spread through companies. I think that what we are seeing is 2 things happening simultaneously. You have this phenomenon that I'm talking about with people more sensitive to criticism working in these large bureaucracies, on top of them also being more sensitive to, like, when a Guardian article says something mean about me, my sorry, people in my life freak out about it, and then we always get the email of, "Oh my god, how could this happen again? You must be devastated right now." And I'm like, "Bro, The Guardian doesn't even have a Twitter account anymore. Like, what are you talking about? Nobody reads this." It just establishes credibility for stuff like Wikipedia articles and getting in front of, like, a few other people's faces in terms of expanding our reach. But yeah, that's my thought on that. But I'd also note how wokeism spread within companies because we were talking to about this, and I hadn't realized it, but it's something that is really interesting, which is, and I note here, by the way, anybody who wants to hire us as consultants to anti-DEIfy your company now that we're stepping back from our day job, absolutely happy to help with that. Stanford MBA, Cambridge degree in technology policy, run major companies in the past, will work inexpensively if we're helping make a company strong. We'll even run for the work for a percentage of the increase in profit we can make you within certain margins or the cost savings we can give you. Because that's the great thing about taking DEI out of a company. You're only saving money. But it was that when the DEI stuff started, what companies did, like they were like, "Oh, I have to put this like whatever person that fits all of these criteria into the company. All right, well, we don't want to put them in like engineering and we don't want to put them in like making products because like they actually need to be good to have those jobs. So where can we put them? Well, HR. Like people don't
Yeah.
really do anything in HR,
HR,
right?
often marketing too, communications, PR, compliance.
And what they didn't realize when they were putting these people in HR and compliance, but specifically HR is where I think the initial crop was dumped,
Yeah.
is that now these people had control over hiring.
Yeah.
And they started to exclusively hire and heavily affect the hiring processes around these DEI objectives, which quickly DEIified the entire companies. And in addition to that, as Simone was talking about, you have things like marketing becoming heavily DEI. What happens when marketing becomes heavily DEI? Then you'll have them leave Twitter when Elon buys it, for example, because they think that they can use the company as a cudgel, even when their customer base, they're still on X. They're still on these platforms. And they don't care. Like, because they're not in this for, at the end of the day, making money. They are now part of the DEI cordyceps virus, and they just want to expand the reach of the virus.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that mechanism for how the spread was in companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've largely understood to be reality for a long time. It's it's funny how things happen. I think people think of arguments around the woke mind virus or the people on the left or the people on the right as being this all being a very concerted, organized effort that happened on purpose, where a bunch of people got together in a room and were like, ah, yes, this is how we shall slowly take everything over. And there are even people who are like, oh, let's conspire to do this, but it rarely works. Conspiracies rarely work
Well,
out.
yeah, and we've been involved in conspiracies. We've been involved in organizations that are supposed to be conspiratorial. People are just, there's not that many like truly effective, independently thinking humans
Yeah.
for a conspiracy to be effective. People are
But what
not that
is
independent.
interesting, and this is why I think your interest in governance is so crucial, is that just the correctly misplaced incentive or the misplacement of a particular agent within a particular area. It's like putting a seed crystal into a
Yeah, so
substance.
it's much worse than a conspiracy in a way. If it was a
Yeah,
conspiracy,
suddenly
you could just
everything
cut it off
can
the head.
just yeah, like in a way that no human, no exerted effort could make something happen. What happens, for example, when you're tempering chocolate, you'll put a seed, like essentially a seed crystal, like a piece of chocolate that has been properly tempered in with a batch of chocolate, and then you raise it to a certain temperature. And the idea is that your
She used to work at a
one
chocolate factory.
your one seed crystal will then help the rest of the chocolate snap into the right crystalline structure. And that's kind of how I see this happening, is that once you get, for example, this certain culture in HR, it's able to make the rest of the company snap into that crystalline structure in a way that doesn't require you to go through each and every single department. It just kind of happens naturally and almost all at once and in a very
Well,
powerful
no,
and
I think out
sweeping
of
way.
fear. HR is the department that can fire you, that determines your salary, moving up and down within the organization. As soon as you control that within an organization, you control the incentives that the organization has, and people will want to DEIify themselves to ensure that they can move up or down. And I
Mm.
think something that you were talking about earlier, like the conspiratorial mindset towards this stuff, I think a lot of that is actually downstream of humanities. And I think that this is really important when I'm interacting with people, and when I'm like, okay, this person's an idiot. When they start to see like big agentic conspiracies everywhere,
Mm.
because, or not an idiot, but the mistake that they're making, and it's an inbuilt human mistake, is humans are evolutionarily programmed to see the world in terms of theory of minds.
Yeah.
So we look for theory of minds in everything. We look for theory of minds in mass groups of humans. We look for theory of minds.
Oh, you'll see faces in tree stumps and in wall plugs. We
Yeah,
just
yeah.
think, yeah, it's
So
very hard not to humanize things.
when you see action, you're not thinking, okay, how could this action have evolved? I.e., how could iterations of this action have been better at replicating themselves than non-iterations of this action, which is actually why most things happen.
Right.
Most actual conspiracies are not agentic. They are not one individual attempting to, in part of a brand conspiracy, fool a bunch of other individuals. It is
Mhm.
just a self-replicating thing.
Mm. So
And
it's
yet
better rather
humans,
than to look at who wants this or who's trying to orchestrate this. I think it's better to look instead at the incentives and where our incentives align.
right, but I think that, and people can say that this is the like a kinder interpretation around this, but it very much isn't if you look at what the implication is.
Hmm.
If this is a memetic virus, like that cordyceps virus, which infects ants and then makes them
Mhm.
just spread the fungus, once an individual is infected, they must be surgically removed from the company. There
Mm.
is no amelioration. There is no cure. The only cure is cut once, cut deep. You have to remove the cancer.
Yeah, I haven't heard of
And
anyone de-escalating from a position that is like,
yeah, have
this
you ever
company's
heard of a
toxic.
woke person genuinely de-escalating? I don't think I ever have.
Yeah, well, I guess here's what I could envision happening. Because what we're doing is here with corporate America, we're contrasting the point at which it was sort of strongly influenced by conservative Christian American culture of like the 90s to now when it has been very influenced by woke culture, the urban monoculture. When that Christian conservative subculture suddenly became the minority in corporate America, that didn't mean that the people who used to enact witch hunts as Christian conservatives no longer existed at organizations. It meant that they kind of realized that they were outnumbered and they had to go underground, as it were, or just be tolerant. And I think that that's more what happens. It's not, these people can exist and not do damage as long as they know that they don't have a mandate and they don't have impunity. I think the only
I think
instance
they're
in which
different from the Christians.
really, okay, I disagree with you. So
So
convince
I'll
me that I'm
explain
wrong.
why.
Okay.
So first you got to put these people in two camps. Who can be ameliorated is the people who just sort of like believed mainstream media and then one day were like, oh shit, I'm being lied to. Not like the torchbearers, but the people, I think a lot of people like us, JD Vance, a lot of these people who are just like, they believed the mainstream narrative and then one day they're like, oh, you guys are all against us. That community I think can reform. The problem with the wokes is they don't have families. They don't actually need to make money. They would
Hmm.
rather enforce the message and self-indulge in a victim mindset than actually make money or keep their job. Whereas with the Christians, they might have been an
They have
evangelical
families to
mom, but they were an
feed.
evangelical mom.
Yeah.
They had 5 kids to feed back home.
Uh-huh.
I know this much better place down the street. The girls are cleaner, the liquor ain't watered down.
Sure, and you get kickbacks.
Hey, man, I got 5 kids to feed.
Take him to the dentist.
I got to put a Benny thing here. I got 5 kids to feed, but they, yeah. So they had to worry about losing their jobs in a way that I think that the wokes don't, and they also had to worry about feeding themselves. You see, was a woke. If you're a Christian and you lose your job, you take some level of personal responsibility for that, even if you were, trying to push a Christian agenda. If
Yeah.
you're a woke person and you lose your job, you don't feel like you messed up in any sense.
No, if anything, you sue and expect to win a ton of
Yeah,
money.
you're the hero of the story, right?
Mhm.
And I think that one thing I will note, and this has surprised me about companies, is after this Trump election cycle, which has appeared very different than previous election cycles. Last time Trump won, there was this broad perception of like, the pollsters got it all wrong. And, the pollsters didn't know what they were doing, but like broadly, everything else is still fine. Like society still works the way we used to think it did. This time, it's almost acted like a mandate against the infected cultural institutions more broadly, with things like
Hmm.
MSNBC being sold now, with things like Disney going back onto X/Twitter, with a lot of rollback in woke policy that I didn't think I would see. I am
Hmm.
actually surprised how quickly business has turned on these individuals. Now, are they still putting out media that's been in production for the past 5 years that has like pronouns? Like, oh God, one of the ones I was actually interested in trying out recently. It was something like Avowed is the game I was thinking of. Awaken or something. Anyway, I'll add it in post, but it turned out to have pronouns in it. And I'm like, I'm not going to play that. Like, I'm not going to do that because I know
But that's inertia, to your point, right?
what.
That
So
is
that's
a
inertia.
product
Yeah,
of
that's not.
inertia.
I think where we are seeing business able to make retreats, we are seeing it in many areas I did not anticipate. So business might be correcting faster than I thought. I'd
Hmm.
also note here about another argument I've heard, which is very interesting. It's that business went woke because woke culture is more consumerist.
It is, I guess, yeah. I mean, the whole thing, the core of woke culture and the urban monoculture involves atomization and divorcing the human from their family, from their community, and commoditizing everything. So suddenly
Yeah.
instead of having friends, you have a therapist, and you have social media and a bunch of things that you buy.
By the way, can I
to
just say how much I
communicate.
love that? Instead of having a friend, you have a therapist.
I mean, but that's what's happening, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, it does. It basically says it's taught all of these original sources of these things that you used to get are toxic. Now you buy it, and to not buy these things is to be a conspiracy theorist, raw milk drinking homesteader who believes in a bunch of crazy things and doesn't vaccinate their kids. Like, and they're seen as crazy. And I was thinking about this when you suddenly were concerned about food dyes last night, of like, now, even when a totally normal person is suddenly kind of concerned about processed foods, there's this feeling about them like, oh, you're one of those. Like, you're one of those off the grid, like, only eats, raw eggs. And by the way, like, I'm super into that, but it is categorized by the urban monoculture as sort of a crazy off the grid conspiracy theorist. So yeah, that does make sense. So you're not going to, and also you're not going to make money from those people. So if you're a business and you're marketing to someone, are you going to market to the person who does their best to avoid hyper processed foods, who does their best to avoid toxic social media, addictive games, and things like that? Or do you go for the person who has fully surrendered themselves to operant condition and dopamine hits?
Well, yeah, I mean,
and
conservative
instant
culture says, restrict yourself,
Yeah,
have a degree of
yes.
self-control.
And those are bad consumers.
Says,
They're not repeat purchasers. They're not sticky. They're not addicted. Like, that's terrible. You're right. That's a
yeah,
bad investment. That is, I think, is the most convincing thing you've actually said to me so far in terms of like why they have chosen to double down so hard on this audience. Is this is the most trigger and spend happy audience, and an audience that is not woke is far more likely to not buy things. That's convincing.
well, I mean, look at the way our family buys things. We try to buy just a few things that are very reusable. And I even look at us when contrasted with much poorer friends that we have. They buy so much more than us. Like,
Oh my
we
God, it
almost,
freaks me out.
yeah, it actually like causes Simone to like almost panic when she sees the way that other people who we're friends with, who are much less wealthy than us, spend money. They like actually like go out to like McDonald's. They like actually like buy like snacks at like
Dude, these days,
stores.
anyone who goes to a restaurant, I'm like, how can you financially survive this? This is
I'll never financially recover from this.
Oh my God. I am never gonna financially recover from this.
every single time someone goes out. Yeah, every single time we go out. RIP.
When was the last time you went out to a restaurant, Simone?
Hold on, I know this. Well, when we were at Hereticon, but that was included.
Okay, so that when somebody else wasn't paying, when was the last time? Can you even remember? It must have been a year ago at least.
Like when you and I just did it because we weren't
Yeah,
at a
when you and I
business.
paid for a meal that you ate. Oh, my birthday at the hibachi place.
Yes, your birthday. So that was pretty recent. Yes,
Okay,
yes.
before my birthday, when?
You got takeout for yourself. We cooked for
Yeah,
the whole
no,
family.
I'm saying you.
Okay, me. Yeah, I honestly cannot. I could not.
It must have been more than a year ago. I'm just pointing out that I think a lot of people don't get, like, they think this stuff is normal, and it's not normal if you're from a conservative cultural group. It is a disgusting amount of overspending that is genuinely nauseating.
Well, and this is how spending used to be. People think that, I guess, in the 1950s, there was just some era of abundance. People were eating shitty canned food. Like, when you actually look at what are considered gourmet recipes at the time, it is stuff that, like, even poor people living on food assistance would not bother to eat. It's stuff. I served food in a Tenderloin San Franciscan food bank. It was better than like the best 1950s had to offer. People don't realize like the level of luxury that they're living with now.
1950s,
And
like if you look at like good 19, it's like
dinner party stuff. You would like go out of your way to like serve to the fancy, your boss, who's coming over for dinner.
Canned beans, Jello. So you'd have like some fruit and some Jello, and then you have some like I'll put things on screen here. It is quite disgusting by
Yeah,
modern.
I'll see. I can share some of my like videos on cooking. So anyway, that was the 1950s. People were like, oh, it's so we live in such, and also going out to eat was a very big deal for a whole family to do that, and maybe a young people courting or something might go out. It's like ooh, I'm really
No, I
showing
mean,
off, or
honestly,
like
one
a
of the most
business dinner.
disgusting signs of opulence is smart casual restaurants being branded as
Oh.
like a regular thing that people should look
Yeah,
into.
what a conspiracy. Yeah, I guess that was sort of maybe what we're seeing is the tail end of this era in which American families were gaslit into believing that eating out regularly was normal, that insanely opulent birthday parties were normal, that
Oh my God, birthday parties for kids are insane. Why would you do that? Why would you give a
yeah.
child a party?
Well,
Sorry.
but even now, like what's so normalized, and I see this, I'm not just among influencers, I'm just saying our friends, people buying cakes for birthday parties. Like, bitch, make a cake. Like, it can be a boxed cake. This is not hard. And it doesn't even have to be good. I mean, I've had so many disaster cakes that, because we're cooking at altitude or with like borrowed pans or something, didn't work out. And we just turned it into a construction cake that, like, it's a problem with like cake dirt, but it's fine. Like, but people are buying, and these are expensive cakes. There's fondant involved. They're multi-tiered cakes. These are, and that's just the cake. Like, what else are they getting? Then they some people are renting decorations.
Oh,
For
by the way,
birthday
just so
parties.
people know how we do toys with our kids. So we do the future police where they take away the kids' toys, but we don't give them all back. In fact, we regularly clear out all but about a quarter of their toys. We put them in the attic and then we wrap them and give them back to them or younger kids later on.
It's great because they treat them like, sometimes they remember them from before, sometimes they don't, but they're always really happy to have them again, and they're otherwise ignored. It's not like they miss them, and if they miss them and ask for them, we give them back, but they
Yeah, but
typically
typically they
don't.
don't miss them or notice them. But if they do, we give them back. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I can't remember the last time they've asked for something back.
which is no, but it's a good system. And I think that so many people, they just are like, oh, that wouldn't, whatever. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's
yeah,
weird.
I think that the consumerist thing might be part of it. Is that the urban monoculture was to an extent crafted or a partnership with big business to create this belief that if you want something, and this is one of the things I've
Well,
noticed
no,
about the
it's
urban
again,
monoculture.
and you're using language that implies intentionality when no, it was that they clicked together. That this on the one part, this memetic virus that promised instant gratification and never having to say no to yourself and never having to do something unpleasant in the moment, plus an industry that profited from that mindset. Like, of course they're gonna love each other.
Yeah, like
They're gonna
the
be best
haze movement,
friends.
of course, works for Doritos. We
Yeah.
need to have like the haze by Doritos and Dunkin' Donuts. That is beautiful.
Hey, is brought to you by Doritos. Yeah, basically. And now there's Heroin Chic brought to you by Ozempic. And now, yeah, it's sort of this really interesting backlash. I think the more interesting question now is, now that there is this backlash to the urban monoculture, and yet organizations are going to have to still figure out how to make money going forward, what are they going to do? I mean, already there's a lot of commentary online about what highly processed food companies are going to do in the face of Ozempic becoming widespread, because people just aren't having the same cravings for highly processed and like snack foods that they normally would. So now what do they sell? And now they're trying to remarket a bunch of things. I don't know if that's even
Yeah.
necessary. Maybe we've already reached this
By the
point
way,
at which people are so not morally, mentally bankrupt, like sort of incapable of self-control, that it doesn't matter.
Simone, I think I remembered when you last went to a restaurant.
Oh, when?
It was when we were speaking at that conference in Vegas, and I took you to that Chinese restaurant, and we ordered that dish that we split, and the waiter shamed us for buying too cheap a dish and splitting it. Do you remember that? That was what, a year ago?
That was at the Bellagio. I don't know if that counts because it was a business trip.
Yeah, I mean, it was an expense to the foundation, so.
So then it doesn't count. Yeah, but if it's a business trip, you don't. I mean, we wouldn't have spent that money to buy two dishes in personally, but especially if you're traveling for business, you should be respectful of the business that's paying for the thing, and then only buy one entree. That's what we did the entire time, that like last personal vacation we took, which was in Switzerland. And we're like, oh shit, it's expensive here. We're going to share one meal going forward. And it was great.
No,
Because
I
all I
just think
wanted
that
to eat on
people
that
need
trip
to
was
like
pears anyway.
normalize this because they don't understand the way people actually lived in the 50s. If you are trying to be trad, being trad is being frugal. Okay?
Yeah.
And this is the problem, is they don't realize this. They think that being trad is a life of abundance, and it
Well,
is.
there's also this theme that keeps coming up in Hannah's Children, the super pronatalist book that's actually super pronatalist, in which parents of 5+ children are interviewed, and basically it's a book compiling their interviews. Very interesting. A common theme that comes up is in response to this question of what will we do when we have, how will we travel once we have 5+ children? How will we get out of the house when we have 4+ children or 6+ children? And the answer is you just don't, like that. You just don't do that anymore. And guess what? Life goes on. Like there's just kind of this expectation of like, but how will we make it work? How can we possibly do it? And once you realize that the answer is you just don't, honestly, things get so much better. I love
Yeah, like the trip
that.
thing. I don't know if people know this, but like even the concept of vacations or trips is like a fairly modern concept.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and
Um,
even the scaled down 1950s version where you would go everywhere in your car and go car camping, even that was very new because the highway system was a new invention.
yeah, like
The
my
concept
dad
that you
was
had
on trips,
roads
he
that
would
you could
always.
travel across America, that was a big deal that you could actually drive across America suddenly.
Yeah, so my dad, whose father was a congressman, so like not like an insignificant person, and a fairly wealthy individual, they'd go on one trip a year, and it was a car trip to the Jersey Shore.
Yep.
That
They
was
would just
it.
stay in one place the whole time. It wasn't freaking Disneyland. It was a house.
Yeah, and I think that we, as a society, are like, this is one of the, you know, you were talking to me about this. You're like, but if I have a kid, how will I go to Milan? It's like, well, maybe you need to not be going to Milan. That's
And
like a
also
one.
Milan sucks. What do you do? There's like one Da Vinci piece, some old churches, but like the rest is just mostly office buildings. What do you, Milan?
We say this as people who used to split our time between countries every other month.
Well, I mean, I think that's also it's kind of like we're speaking from a position of so much privilege and abundance. It's kind of shitty for us to do. Like you being like, oh, sex isn't that interesting, but you've had so much sex. Like
Yeah,
you,
that's very much the way I am with travel as well.
yeah, like you've
I had, like,
traveled so
way
much
too
throughout your
much
life.
sex, and now I'm like, you guys shouldn't live for sex. Don't do that. I used to travel, as I said, I think it was earlier. I said over 100 countries. I actually think, if I remember correctly, the number was over 50 countries, but over a large number of countries. I've done tons and tons of travel. I've lived in like 7 countries, and now I'm just like, travel sucks. We still have a house in Peru.
Yeah, we need to sell. We
You
need
need to get
sell
that sold, Simone,
I
ASAP.
know.
Please,
Well, I'm
please.
trying. We have to make all the plumbing repairs first, and
Do you though?
the house. Yes, we do. We actually really. There's no hot water in the apartment right now, and the housing association is blocking Alexander from doing the fixes. But again, see, like this is the thing: is everyone's like, "Well, I want to have multiple houses someday. I want to have a vacation." No, you don't. Do you understand what a hassle that is? I mean, 1, there's the property taxes. 2, there's the constant repairs. 3, there's the cleaning. 4, there's the travel between the places and all the money that you have to spend just doing the travel. And then, of course, whenever you bring over more supplies from one country or another, there's import or export taxes that some customs person decides to like slap on you after digging through your suitcases. This is not fun. Ugh. Yeah, it's super interesting to see how just having a lot of kids and the forced frugality and groundedness that a large family forces on people causes them to become a lot happier, it seems, in this book. It could be, it doesn't have to be children. Like it could be that, I don't know, both of your legs are cut off or something or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it could just be that you have been forced by law enforcement to not leave a certain radius around your house, but then suddenly your life gets a lot better because you're not doing all this stuff that ultimately doesn't make you happy anyway. I just find that interesting as a concept. But yes, okay. The big thing that I'm taking away from this conversation is that a big reason why the urban monoculture paired so well with corporate America was that they mutually benefited from reinforcing instant gratification and consumerism.
And how else is a flag company supposed to stay in business if you don't change it every year?
Well, what was
the colonizer's flag, the new gay pride
they
flag.
haven't updated it recently, have they?
Sales are way down. No one's buying American flags anymore. We had some success when we jumped on the pride bandwagon, but now that it's a settled issue, there's just no demand for flags anymore. Guys, I've got it. What if we updated the gay flag for trans people?
Actually, they haven't. Yeah, I feel
They
like
need to add like a new like Kathia pattern layer onto the end of it.
I feel like they ran out of new communities to add.
That's why I said they need to add the Kathia.
Oh yes, to make it Muslim too. Yes.
No. Specifically
cannot
to
wait
make it
till they
like
have,
Hamas
a big,
coded.
like Muslim sign on the center of the gay pride flag. You know they'll do that one day. You know,
like
just
the
like,
star, the like sort of there's the moon.
the
It's
crescent
like a
moon thing.
Yeah, the crescent moon. Yeah.
I
Why
could
not?
see. I could
No,
see them
to
doing
make
that.
it extra good though, it would have to be like a crescent moon, like inside a Star of David, to be like, no, we're inclusive. We're not anti.
No, they would not. No, they hate the Jews.
No, but like I just feel like it would be so extra offensive in a way that actually works with the colonizer flag if you were to do that. Because already, like if we're slapping that on, like
No,
we need
they
to
literally would put like a little X in the Star of David. They honestly would.
like.
All right, and Simone, I love you to death. I have enjoyed talking with you, and I am so glad to be married to you. And I am so lucky that you are a woman who seems to enjoy frugality to an extent that I find frustrating when it comes to buying things for our kids.
What? I let you buy the bouncy house today. How can you say that?
You got a
I did
little
not.
inferior. So this is the way I was doing the cost. Per kid, it was $25, okay? We have 4 kids. Oh no, $50 per kid. $50 per kid for a permanent plaything is not that bad, especially considering we plan to have more kids.
Permanent. Have you met our children?
I will-
patches. That thing had better have patches because that thing is getting stabbed.
Got a little indoor bouncy house at BJ's for the kids. But I'm like, look, I look at what I pay for them to do things on weekends, like go to various kids' places. And $50 per kid is, that's like 4 weeks of stuff. If we can get them better than that, especially in the winter when they can't go outside to play.
Yeah, I think that's big. That's what convinced me is I want them to still be able to exercise and get all their energy out in the winter. And this is going to be great for that. So
I love you.
I love you too. Good day, sir.
Good day.
Said good day. Where does that come from? What does I said good day? Like, is that just a trope?
You lose. Good day, sir.
That's a good day.
I said good day.
I don't know. Maybe it comes from talking to British people.
No, it's like it comes up so much. I wonder if it's like that trope of like they always use they throw in the sound of that guy going ah when he falls off something, like that sound effect being used, and it's like you have
I don't know,
to throw it in and
Simone.
stuff. All right. Anyway, bye. Bye.
Bye. I'll go
Bye.
into the next room, okay?
Okay.
Nobody else go. Guys, nobody else can go faster because doing that is okay.
I love you guys.